I enjoy being back home. This island, this community have given me a lot. Spent a lot of years in the Washington, D.C. area doing the same thing as a clinician.
Can you hold the mic closer to you?
As a mental health clinician. I'm currently working at Snyder Regional Hospital in a wellness center. I'm the administrator there and also one of the clinicians at the Snyder Regional Hospital.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lloyd Maynard. I am a son of the soil. Actually, people don't know I live up the hill, so as a kid, I used to walk past this church all the time, going up this hill. I am a licensed social worker. I have a master's in social work, also a master's in human services. I also used to work at Department of Human Services, but for the last 9 years, I've been with Department of Education, working in the schools directly with students, young men particularly, girls as well. So I'm in the trenches, dealing with the everyday problems of the students and families in the community. I decided to go back to school. I saw a need for more male therapists, and so I decided to go back to school and see how I could give back to my community in that way. And I've been doing that for about 2.5 years now, working for Miss White, and I intend to go on and get my clinical license and keep doing what I'm doing.
Awesome.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Curtis Callender. Also born and raised here, educated here between All Saints, and then graduated from Antilles. I'm a licensed professional counselor here, as well as licensed in Florida as a licensed mental health counselor. And so I've worked both in Florida in various different settings, as well as here. I've been back home in the Virgin Islands since about 2019, and in that time I've worked both at St. Thomas Healthcare, I spent a bit of time at Department of Health, and then since then I worked at the Armory providing counseling services there as well, and most recently ventured off into doing my own thing with virtual counseling services. Currently only on my Florida license, but I'm working on getting situated to be able to provide additional counseling services to the community here as well, because this is definitely where my heart is. I enjoy doing this kind of work. It can be difficult at times, but I think there's something to be said for helping people create change in their lives and helping them develop insight in various areas that they may not have had before.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Guys, if you guys notice, they have a passion for helping. Two of these gentlemen mentioned that they lived away, but they're back, and they appreciate the work that they do, and hence, I'm so happy that they accepted the opportunity to come to speak to us, because this is sometimes a population that we don't get to hear enough from. So today you're going to hear from them, and we'll have the opportunity to ask questions after.
So today, it's not about blaming parents. It's not about blaming your father, mothers, or society. It's about understanding how boys become men, and how emotions and the messages that you receive play a role in how you perceive life now. So, we have a couple of ice-breaking questions. So the first one is, what was something that you were discouraged to do as a young man when it comes to showing your emotions? Anyone? Come on, guys.
Men.
I can't hear you. Okay, I'm gonna come over.
Repeat the question. Repeat the question.
What was something that, when it comes to emotions, what was something that you were discouraged from doing?
Boys are not supposed to cry.
Okay.
Okay.
What else?
Complain.
Complain. What else? Okay. You want to ask the other one, Jessica?
Okay. Do we still send those messages today? Are those messages, so you said that you guys have heard that message when you were young. Do we still have those messages being expressed today? Yes? No? Which one? Yes? Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. So I'm going to ask you, amazing guys, a couple of questions. And then we're going to kind of reach out to the audience to kind of see their feedback. So what message about emotions did boys receive growing up in our community?
Well, I think one message that, I mean, it kind of echoes what you were saying is that, it's not okay to cry, right? And I think coupled with that is almost as if like the only emotion that is acceptable is anger. And so I think that we kind of miss the bar when it comes to teaching the whole range of emotional experience. If only this is allowed, then the boys don't have a chance to even fully like understand or acknowledge feelings in other areas to then learn how to appropriately express them.
Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? I think man up, and we hear that all the time in our community, be macho, you got man up. And growing up hearing that, give you a false sense of what a man should be and how a man should look. And never really have great example of what man up means. So they tell you man up, and especially if you're coming from your mom or your aunt or a teacher, you don't know what it means. And nobody have ever explained that to us. But I think it's a deeper understanding of our emotions, and man should not cry. And that stemmed from, we had our parents who never learned what their emotion and never regulate their emotions. So we have folks who did not learn how to regulate their emotions, teaching kids or teaching their children how to regulate their emotions. So it starts from there, how we teach our children, how we teach our kids from young age how to regulate. And it's not going to also start from the adults or from the children, but as a community, how we teach self-regulation.
Let me see. My answer to this is kind of layered because words is one thing, but actions are another. And sometimes, you might hear from your parents or even your friends, don't cry. Crying is for wussies. Crying is for punks and stuff like that, which causes added pressure on to a child. And with that added pressure comes anxiety. These are things that many of our parents didn't really understand. They didn't really understand anxiety. They didn't really understand depression. And for me specifically, what I used to hear a lot from my parents was, don't talk back. What I say is the word, and don't talk back. And if you talk back, that's rude. If you show emotion when you're talking back, that's rude. One of my mother's famous sayings was, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And as a kid, I struggled with that because what you did make me feel a kind of way, and I can't help but feel because I'm a human. But if I tell my mother this, I'm going to get slapped for talking back. So right then and there, she kind of stunted my emotional growth in a kind of way, my ability to speak up for myself. And just, the message that she sent was just take whatever the world gives you and don't say nothing and go with it. So I had to get over that emotional hurdle of, not being encouraged to speak up for myself and make me feel like if I feel a kind of certain way because somebody did me something, that it's okay to feel that way. It's not bad at all. So I think the message that we need to send the kids that it's okay to feel this way. It's what you do with the feeling after is what matters.
Thank you so much, Mr. Maynard. And you kind of made me segue into the next question, which is a little bit more reflective. And so I would like to hear from both Mr. Revere and Mr. Calendar on this, because what I would like for you to share is, what's your earliest recollection of when you were told, it doesn't matter by whom, when you were told not to cry or not to show emotion? And the second part to that was, what was the unspoken message that you internalized?
Okay, let me recall. Most likely, I think my early recollection of that is doing something and getting beat for it, and I couldn't cry. And the more, if I cried, the harder I get hit. And trying to figure out, okay, I'm getting hit, but why can I not cry? And that also kind of suppress a lot of my emotions and make me even harder, and, then when I got older and get into relationship, it was like, okay, how do I express myself? And also not understanding, because I was never taught that way, or I never seen my family or my parents, displaying that in front of me. So, that really kind of resent in me. And then also, now, as a parent, I always say, well, I will never be like my parents. I'll never parent that way. But that's how I learned how to parent, through them. So a lot of things that I was seeing myself doing as a parent was directly related to what I observed from them. So I had to change. I had to go in and change some of the things I was doing and look at it and say, well, yes, there was some good things, and there was some not so good things. So which one should I take? And which should I just leave behind? So it's just that, how, I'm being inflicted punishment on, and I cannot express myself.
Well, the message I got from my parents beating me and then tell me why I'm crying for and ask me if if you want something else to cry for. So the message I got was just don't cry. You know what I mean? Or even before the beating start, to don't cry. Because if I start crying before the beating, then it's like I get beat even worse for crying. But they never asked, why am I crying? I'm crying because I realized I did something bad. And not only did I hurt myself, I hurt my parents. I disappointed my parents. And that's a feeling of shame. I'm human, so I'm going to feel that. But I couldn't communicate that to them because I'm here crying. And then if I cry more, they're going to beat me more for crying because they think that crying is rude. So the message I got was that crying was bad. And I should just hold it in and just suck it up.
I'm trying to think on maybe what the first memory was, but I would say probably maybe around 5 or 6 or something like that, riding a bike and falling, trying to ride a bike anyway, and falling, and then starting to cry as a result, and then being kind of pick up, brush off. But what are you crying for? It's all right, just calm down, blah blah. Going from there. And so I think in that instance, I kind of just felt that, to kind of echo what you were saying, that like crying wasn't okay. And I think kind of the lesson that you learn is, number one, to not really acknowledge what you feel. And then secondly, there was a clear message that crying somehow equated to being weak. And so I think that kind of follows us as men throughout life, because there are plenty of moments in life where it's perfectly acceptable to cry, if you're talking about grief, if you're talking about losing a loved one or whatever the situation is. But you're not going to get somebody who's willing to express how they feel if their entire life, between not only their family life and then what society is kind of teaching directly and indirectly, teaching them that it's not okay to express certain emotions, they're going to end up being perhaps stunted in a way, or maybe not even have the language to truly identify what it is that they're feeling.
We have a question on the floor.
I don't know if it's a question so much, but a comment. I find that everyone is talking a lot about this emotion being related to parents. But I think that Mr. Rivera said is a societal thing. So it's not just the not crying because of your parents beating you. Is as a boy, now that I'm older, I knew now that I probably had a concussion playing football.
Right.
But I dare not cry. I mean, my head was hurting me, but what I do? I have to keep playing. And then the pressure is not just from the boys around, the women as well, right? Because if you start to look, what kind of jokey, wimpy man you are. So the pressure is not, but everything so far has been referencing like if it's just a parent-child thing, but you realize that is across the society. That's how we've been socialized. It's not just your mom gonna beat you. It's in every aspect of your life. So we've been growing up that way all along, right?
So I think the reason why we started with the question is that the reality is that our first lessons come from the home. It comes from when you start to understand who you are as an individual and how that plays a significant role in how you see yourself and how the world sees you. So I'm pushing the question out. Thank you, Mr. Benjamin. I'm pushing the question out to other individuals in the audience. The same question. When were you first introduced to understanding your emotions or not addressing your emotions?
Yeah, good afternoon. We speak about our parents and everything, but do you know when you go to school, sometimes the teacher themselves cause you to feel, law, the things they say about you, the behavior towards you that makes you don't want to even go to school. So, it's not just parents and maybe your friend, but the teacher themselves who should have known better. Break your spirit as well.
Oh, careful. Anyone else? This is your space. This is your space to have a conversation. This is your space to understand what it is to own where you are and understand that there's a possibility for growth.
Also, I think our experience as people of color, Black people, is deeper in our experiences. Even post-slavery, our experience is not like any others. We came here, against our will. Our ancestors came here against our will. We had to make do with what was given to us. Our experience, even our experience of parenting didn't come from us a lot of times. It came from our masters. It came from people, our overseers. So a lot of things that we have and a lot of things that we have learned, the learned behavior came from that time, and we continue with it. If this is what's good for them, this is good for us also. So we have to start changing the narrative. We have to understand where this came from, and the discipline and the corporate punishment. We have to understand that and understand what effect it has had on us and continue to have on us. So we have to change. We have to start changing our narrative and writing our own history and understanding where it come from. It basically start with us. And then it just was handed down from generation to generation, and we accept it as norm, as this is what it is, and we're not going to change it because this is how it always was and always will be. But we have to change that, because we have a group of kids coming up now is not like us anymore. They are different, and a lot of them will push back. And a lot of them will say, hey, maybe this is not for me, you know, and how we have to change. We have to continue to change and understand them also. And our discipline style when it comes to raising them and understanding who they are, you know, we have to understand that. And we have to be willing to change and do things differently.
I just wanted to point out one more thing, Mr. McCarthy. To piggyback on what Mr. Rivera was saying about the effects of slavery and intergenerational trauma, scientists have discovered now that trauma can be passed down through DNA, epigenetics, you understand? And, you know, some people that you see on the street, homeless, having a mental illness, they probably had a predisposition, a genetic predisposition to mental illness, and then one traumatic event sent them over the edge. Yeah. So this is why we need the community to understand that it's okay for men, not just for men, of course it's about men, but for people itself, society itself, it's okay to feel vulnerable. And emotional regulation is important, because if we don't learn if we don't learn how to regulate our emotions, our anger, our grief, our joy, you know, even the ambiguous feelings, and you know, you end up making a decision out of anger or anxiety, how does the decision turn out? You usually make a decision that you regret, right? Everybody in here has made a decision out of anger or anxiety that you end up regretting. And that decision could derail your whole life, could change your whole trajectory of your whole life. So it's not so much about the problem that you have in life, it's the emotion that bring about that. So where you could emotionally regulate, calm down, and then make a rational decision that's not going to derail and affect your life. And that's the message that the young kids and all the men in here, all the people in here need to understand as well.
Thank you so much for that. I want us to go further into another area in terms of how, as men, you learn. And I want to go into the topic of provision as opposed to emotional presence. Many men have received, or they provide food, clothing, shelter, necessities, but were never taught emotional awareness. So my question would be for you guys, what is the difference between being physically present and emotionally available? Physically present or emotionally available?
I think that what we're describing is when we decide to tune out and become numb. You know, just become emotionally numb. And I'll share a personal story that with my father, he never really said don't cry, but he showed it don't cry. You know, it was always we're complaining for. And whatever excuse I gave him, whenever I couldn't please him, I couldn't meet his standard, whether it was school, whether it was work around the house, it's like there was no excuses. He was just cold and unemotional. And I had to go to my mother. She had to be the buffer to help me explain, you know, myself further. So I grew up with this idea that my father was heartless, that he didn't have feelings, that he was just this cold, unemotional person that lived in this black and white world, and if it wasn't black, it was white. There was no gray area. And it wasn't until that he passed, when he was on his decline, is when I saw my father shed his first hair. And it was an epiphany for me, because here I am seeing this man, you know, go through all the trials in life without crying, you know, without being vulnerable, without even looking sad. He would yell and he would argue and stuff like that, but he never cried. So to see him come to the state where he got debilitated and couldn't even care for himself, couldn't walk, couldn't do anything for himself, and that he cried, it was like an epiphany for me. And it's a moment in my life that I was going to cherish, because to me, he was like Superman. Like, he had no feelings. He was indestructible. He was a man of steel. And to see him come to that vulnerable point where he's in a bed crying and I have to feed him, the nurses have to come and change him and everything, it made me realize, like, whoa, this man really was human the whole time. And Read showed me that, I was just sad that he took his deathbed to show his humility. This was a lesson I could have got years earlier, but I didn't end up getting it till then. But it was that was my moment where I actually saw, that, everybody has emotions and they're very, very powerful.
So for the audience, just a show of hands, which one is easier? To be a provider or to be somebody that's emotionally present? Hands up. No, the women, not the women. Men. So who feels it's easier to be a provider? Okay.
I think we have to get away from gender roles. I think gender roles have put us in a box, when it comes to men and women, especially when it comes to a husband and a wife. And a lot of times, because of that gender role and that provider, I'm a provider, it made me, okay, I'm a provider, so I don't have to be emotional. I don't have to be there. I don't have to be present, the emotional part. So that kind of keep me away from showing my emotion to my children. And we have to get away from that, because I know in each household we have couples here, and there's a couple there's one who is good at cooking, one is good at finance. And if cooking is a woman's role, then, and if she can't cook, then you're going to continue to have a cook. And you're going to continue to say, yes, hey, yes, baby, this food is good, when you know it's not good. And if it's the man, it's the role to manage the finance, and every month you in debt because he's not doing a good job of that. Are you going to continue to allow him to do that? I think we have to look at what your strength in relationship strength. Not everyone's going to be emotionally there. Some going to come with more advanced than others. But I think we have to look at that gender role and understand what it is, and go away from that traditional gender role. Because, we all have strength, and we have to basically take advantage of the strength that we have, and not stay in that box and continue to have folks tell us this is how it's going to be, this is how it should be. You have to what's good for your home. You know your strength. You the expert of your home, and understand what that means. And when you and couples get together, you have to understand, okay, babe, I'm good at this, I'm not good at this, and be honest with it. And a lot of times we're not honest with it, and we continue to go down that rabbit hole and expecting a different result each time, and then, no, it's not going to happen. But we have to understand, you have to understand who you are, and also you have to understand your strength. And if that's not your strength, say, hey, I'm not good at that. And move on from that, and basically have that conversation with each other and say, hey, this is how we're going to do this.
Yeah, I think that as men, we've taken the concept of provision to mean, like, very literally just financial provision. And, to go back to the original question of being physically present versus emotionally present, I think a lot of times we kind of get sucked into this, well, I'm here, I'm in the house, I'm paying the bills, I'm providing this, and kind of think that that's enough. But financial provision is important, absolutely, but that alone doesn't keep the household together, at least not in a happy way. So you have to make sure that you're also emotionally present. And when I say that, I mean aware and attuned to what is happening in your house. What is the ebb and flow of your household? And how are you not only aware, but how are you then reacting to what is happening? And are you making your wife, are you making your children feel supported and feel that you care? I recently saw this clip on Instagram, maybe about a month ago at this point, and there was this very famous musician, Akon from Africa, multimillionaire, right? And his stance was that to be successful as a man, this is what I'm doing. I'm providing, right? I'm making sure y'all are taken care of. You have everything you want. We live in this amazing house, et cetera, right? He's like, I'm not going to every dance recital. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. Meanwhile, he has a bunch of kids. And so he got a lot of backlash for that because the point was, yeah, you are providing everything financially, but when it's all said and done, the money is gone, the money is spent. When your kids look back at you and their memories of you and what your legacy is, are they going to say, my father was there? Are they going to say that my father cared, that I knew that he cared and was trying to ensure that I had the best life? You know, I'm not just financially, but in other areas as well. And so, I mean, that kind of stuck with me because for somebody who is as successful as he is, you know, he basically sat there and said, it is what it is. I don't care. I'm not attending all these things because my job as a man is to put money on the table, and that's it.
Thank you so much. But I want to piggyback just a little bit on that question because I think, Mr. Rivera, you mentioned something that really perked my interest, where you said we have to have honest conversations to indicate our where our strengths and our weaknesses and other things of the sort. What I would like to understand is if you can explain to us what causes us, or men in general, not to really be honest up front and say why, you know, what they're strong at and what they're weak at and where they may need assistance.
Simple word, pride. You know, pride. You know, we are so prideful, and sometimes our pride gets in our way of becoming who you should be. You know, pride always, okay, I'm not going to tell, I'm going to hide this. I'm going to not tell my mate that I'm not good at this, or I'm failure. I don't want to fail. I don't want to look at that I'm not doing the right thing. And then you rather go down and rather roll down this hill, you know, because of your pride. And I think we have to put our pride aside and understand what's best for myself, what's best for my family, and take that route, you know. Because at the end of the day, you know, when your family, your marriage failed, your kids, you know, gone off and things are not going well, what you have? You know, you want to still hold on to your pride? But I think the thing is the pride. We have to put our pride aside.
I think in addition to pride, some of it is fear and you know, kind of what you said, you know, that fear of not fulfilling what we feel our expectations are, right? And if we are vulnerable and share that we're struggling with this or struggling with that, especially if you're somebody who is married, does that now mean that I am contributing to a diminished sense of my wife's security? If she feels like I don't have it all together, what does that mean? Is she going to trust me in this role? Is she going to trust that I can lead this family? You know, if I am admitting that I don't have all the answers in this particular scenario, or that I'm struggling to feel, struggling with whatever feeling. I think in addition to that fear, going back to kind of what the gentleman here in the white shirt, you were talking about society and how men and women kind of perpetuate some of this stuff. If we're being real, sometimes when men are vulnerable about things that are affecting them or how they feel, maybe it's not an issue in the moment, but sometimes when conflict arises, that's one of the first things that's thrown back into the man's face in that situation. So if you get into an argument, your husband has been vulnerable with you and said, you know, he's struggling with whatever it is in this particular area, and now because you're upset, you use that as a point to kind of dig at him in the moment. Now the trust and willingness to be vulnerable again is going to be eroded, and he's not going to be willing to do that.
And to expand on this a little bit more, Mr. Rivera mentioned pride, Mr. Callender mentioned vulnerability. Well, those are all insecurities. You know, those are all emotions that we could just put under the umbrella of insecurity. And when people don't know how to deal with the insecurities, dysfunctional behavior follows. And You know, even to the question earlier about is it easier to be a provider than to be physically present? Yeah, that's why it's easier to be a provider, because to be emotionally present means that eventually you're going to have to confront your insecurity that you're running from. And then when it comes to children and families now, when children have these same issues that parents run from, is because they see in their insecurity in their child, and they themselves don't know how to deal with their insecurity. So they run from dealing with the insecurities with their child and then run over to the providing realm, because that's easier. All I got to do, put in these 8 hours, bring home this paycheck, I'm good, and I just shut off the light of insecurity and act like it doesn't matter, act like it doesn't exist, but it keeps rearing its head over and over and over again until you actually deal with it. So it's all about understanding your insecurities.
So this is also your space. It's not just the gentleman on the stage. So who would like to talk a little bit about how that shows up in their lives? The mic is right there.
So I have a different point of view. I don't think it's easier to be a provider. I think anybody that says that is not being honest with himself. It's easier to be emotionally available, because if you provide, providing is not easy. I think we could all agree to that, correct? So to say it's easier to be emotionally available isn't all the way true. What I do believe is that as men, we are required to be providers plus. And I think saying that out loud, this is loud, saying that out loud makes it seem like you're asking for more, and it may seem selfish or unfair, but that's what it is. And men are okay with that, because we have to do what we have to do. But do also understand that men are going to be emotionally available how they know how to be. Now, can you teach a man that doesn't know how to be more emotionally available? Sure. But you must come with that understanding that he's not going to be available how you want him to be, because unless you say how you want him to be, he will never know how you want him to be. And even if you say how you want, if he can't do it, it's not going to happen unless you teach him and you walk him through that process. So I think we need to make sure that when we say things, we make sure we put the honest perspective, because saying it's insecurity, to some point, yes, but if I'm insecure in a relationship, I'm not saying just in general, part of being insecure is because you're also not sure. And you're not sure not because of you only, but also the person you're with is supposed to secure you, and vice versa, which is why as men we try to make sure our women feel secure, and we also hope that our women make us feel secure also. Yeah, food for thought.
Yeah, I hear you. I think we're not trying to paint a broad brush with everyone, because everybody's different. Some people, yes, it's easier to be more emotional. Some folks, it's easier to be a provider. I think is all individual, and also your upbringing and your experience. So it's still individual. Because I could be a great provider, but emotionally, it's difficult for me to go there, or vice versa. So I think it's based on all people's experience and their individuality.
All right. But a question. It's like a question plus a little insight. Okay, for instance, I could be a provider, and I can be emotional. Now, my emotion towards my family, okay, let's put wife first. I might be doing the best that I can, the way that I know how, and you get shoot down. Now, what they're going to do to you is going to discourage you from being emotional to the fullness as if she was supportive. This is the problem we have. You are trying to be emotional, available, but when you try, it's not good enough for them. It's not meeting to their standard, and so what you do, you just withdraw yourself. That's why providing seems much easier than to be emotional. Emotional take a little more work to do. And when you get, just like a teacher, you go to school and you're trying your best, and instead of they assist you, they call you down. What you're going to stop, concentrate on what they are telling you. And that is what happening to men. Now, because stop here and say emotional is much easier because providing, but truth be told, nobody wants to be denied. Anytime you start to break my spirit, then silence comes. So then, or he emotionally disattached. You understand? That's all it is.
Before you rebut, can I have you guys respond to this gentleman, please?
Okay, so what I also, the guy made some very good points, but I think that being emotionally present is not just about listening, it's about empathizing. And some people don't understand how to do that. And these are things that we teach in therapy. So for some people who really don't understand how to empathize and who only see things through their eyes, because I experienced that in my growing up that, we live in two different worlds, me and my parents. And the things that they're seeing and talking about are not that really relevant in my day and time. And it's the same with the youths of today. So a person has to learn how to empathize if they don't have it naturally. And in terms of the providing now, whether it's easy for some people to provide or hard for some people to provide, there's emotional wrapped up in that too, because employers are going to treat you wrong, right? When the price of gas and inflation and all these things rise up and it's harder to pay your bills, what kind of emotions come about? Anger, sadness, depression. So even in providing, you got to deal with emotions. And we see where people don't know how to deal with their own emotions and they're mad at their boss or they're mad at a coworker and they pop off, end up losing their job. It all still goes back to those same emotions. So yeah, it's kind of nuanced like what Mr. Rivera is saying. You can't paint everybody with the same brush. But for the most part, in this society, it comes across like it's easier to provide. Even if it's maybe a little bit or harder, it just depends on the person. But it all still comes back to your own individual emotions, that if you don't even, as a provider, you don't know how to manage your own emotions, how are you going to teach your child how to manage their emotions? And that's what the problem is.
I think in response to what you were saying, I think a big piece of that comes down to the need for there to be clear communication in a relationship. I think a lot of times because something is important to us or because we know what we mean, we expect our spouse to just automatically know what it is that we mean and be able to read our mind. But they can't read your mind. And so it's important that, man, woman, whoever, that you are explaining what you mean when you say certain things to your spouse so that it's clear and there's no room for misinterpretation. You're not leaving your spouse guessing, because of what he was just explaining was the experience of, being told, not being emotionally available, not being present, not doing this and that, trying, but it not being good enough, and then kind of being still chastised even though he was actively trying. And so don't make your spouse guess what it is that you're looking for, what it is that you want. And then on top of it, when you see them trying, even if it's still not quite where you want, acknowledge the effort. That goes a long way, I think, for men, even if you still express a little bit of dissatisfaction that, it's not quite where I want it yet or what I'm looking for yet. The fact that I can look at you and say, okay, you know what? I see that you're actively trying. That makes a difference in what happens next, whether there's a willingness to continue to try or whether it's just like, well, I don't know what to tell you. I'm done. I've given it my all. So whether they continue or they step back and kind of disassociate from the whole thing is in part based on the response that they get when they are trying.
And I hear that all the time from men, same things. And, and then when talking to women, and when I ask them, what do you want from a man? I want a man who is emotionally there for me, who communicates, who's very loving, who's affectionate. I hear that all the time. But when a man who's all of that come to you like that, it's like, oh, no, he's too soft. I don't want to deal with him. He's so emotional every time we talk about something. He get very emotional. I don't want that. I want him to man up. But that's not what you're asking for. So that you send those mixed, women send a lot of those mixed emotions also, to the men. So when a man come to you and hey babe, this is what's going on, I'm explaining, and you're like, what are you complaining for? You need to deal with it. This is how I am. But he's expressing himself. So as he said, they go back into the shell. And then once he's not available, he's not communicating anymore. He's a selfish, all those things. So the women, and also the emotion, you have to be careful of the mixed signals you send. I want to know what you want. Because when, as you said, be careful what you pray for, you might get it.
Thank you so much. Oh.
One thing real quick, just to piggyback off of what you said. You have to be willing to also do whatever it is that you are asking of your partner. There has to be that level of reciprocity and willingness to also do the same thing. So you can't it all be about your partner changing or your partner doing this and everything is your partner's fault. And then when they basically ask for the same from you and shine a mirror back, there's resistance to you doing the same work that you're asking them to do. So, because relationships require that there has to be cooperation and willingness to basically, both sides have to give a little bit, so.
All right, thank you. I want to put a pin right here. We're going to come back with our next segment to that. But gentlemen in the back, I want to take your question.
I'm so happy my classmate Lloyd asked me to come in. My teacher from Midorkin. The question I have ties into society and social construct, right? And I think you said something earlier, Lloyd. I think my teacher said something about historically, life is a social construct. We're in a capitalistic construct, a construct that we don't control the economy of. So when we say male, the idea of a man is a provider, if we're not in control of that realm, and that's what defines us, the average man of color in here is not at the top of the food chain economically. So I think when we discuss manhood and insecurity and feelings of who we are as men, where does it tie in that social construct with us being at the economic bottom of the food chain? Because I've seen, just to be blunt, when finances are great, a lot of relationships tend to go much easier in life.
Exactly. And this speaks to a lot of my experiences, especially when I was a young man coming of age. I went to school. I was in the States living in Texas. And that's when I really got to really see and experience racism. I really understand that black men, we are at the bottom of the totem pole. We are the ones with targets on our backs. And I could always remember, that, thank the Lord that I'm still here because I experienced that firsthand when police almost killed me twice. This is way before social media. I could have been George Floyd. I didn't understand that this is what I have to face as I try to do something for myself, do what my parents tell me to do, go to school, finish, go to college, do your best, and then I got to go out in this world and deal with racism, with people trying to knock me down. And, I studying so hard for these accomplishments, and I filling out application after application and just getting denied. you know, and I have to go suffer by, you know, to work jobs that don't even require a college degree, and I had to do all this work to build myself up. You know how much anxiety I went through? You know how much depression I went through? So yeah, so being a provider, like I said earlier, you still got to deal with emotion. And it's hard. And this is why, especially here in St. Thomas, where you see us, our high cost of living, why the majority, not necessarily the majority, but a certain percentage of parents are not emotionally available for their children, not because they can't, because time don't allow, because economics require them to work 2 and 3 jobs. And these children have to grow up and raise themselves. And in my generation, we were raised on TV. In this generation, they're raised on social media, which brings out its own set of negative emotions, as we can see, which is why, you know, Facebook is getting sued, YouTube is getting sued, and all these type of things. So then now to go back to what Peter was saying about black men and their place in society, I mean, just look at the amount of black men that have gotten killed by police, and they were doing the right thing. So when you go out into this world, and not just in America, in St. Thomas too, when we're basically almost priced out of the real estate market. You know, the way things here could be politically, if you're not with the right political party, you don't get the highest paying jobs. And this explains why a lot of these, you know, parents can't or don't step up to the plate, because they themselves don't know how to deal with these complex problems in this capitalistic social construct where we value money, right? And we value having a permanent underclass to keep your foot on, to keep the neck on, because that's what capitalism is. That's what drives it. You have to have a weak class to keep your neck on them, and that weak class is black people. So this is why it's important now for us to understand our emotions better, so we could help, so we could learn how to deal with these economic problems that we're going through. You know, especially with the way the country is going right now. You know, emotions, we gotta learn how to deal with emotions. You know, so I definitely agree with what Mr. Bailey said. Anybody else?
All right. So, to the economic part, I don't think anybody's going to necessarily disagree, but I do think that how we change it going forward is going to be upon us. Most of the bad things that affect us come from us, and the good things tend to get shamed by us. Like if somebody's smart, we tend to talk bad about them generally as a people, right? We tend to be like, oh, you're a nerd or something like that. But if I'm failing the class and somebody's smoking weed, we tend to celebrate that as a people. So we have to, before we put the blame on anybody else, we got to fix within ourselves what we need to fix first. Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Right, correct. But, you know, to refer back to the social construct piece, you know, and capitalism is all about the values. We wonder why the kids so violent. There's violence in the movies. There's violence in video games. You know, we all grew up where we realized that when it comes to being smart, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be popular. You get shamed for being smart. You get shamed for being a nerd. But when you get older, you realize, and you turn around with Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk. These guys were the nerds. They want the jocks and the popular guys, the ones that, you know, got the girls because they laugh, they crack the most jokes in school. You know, they had people doing the work for them. They cheated and stuff like that. So yeah, society has its own its own ills that cause these problems. So that's why it's important for us as therapists to understand these things, highlight them, and help guide people to more, socially appropriate and desirable behaviors that can improve their quality of life.
I changed the topic slightly. We know that one of the challenges we have is, like, this forum is for men. We have lots of women here, right? No, and it included something that Ms. Pini said earlier, where as an educator, right, we see cases where we have lots of single parents. In most cases, there's a mother. Where you talk about the emotional, the regulation that boys and girls might need. So it's a mother who is home shouting, screaming, telling this young man what to do and not to do. And he goes to school, and the majority of the teachers are female. And here's another woman again telling the boy what to do, what he shouldn't do. If he gets in trouble, 90% of our principals are women again, superintendents, commissioners. So throughout the system, it seems to be a lot of women who seem to be telling boys what's it like to be a man. So in lots of cases, even we see it all the time, tomorrow is Father's Day, and there's going to be a lot of, I hear it publicly, and we know we have women who are like fathers, and we try and make them feel like it's okay because as a single parent, you are taking on the role of both the male and female. So it's still that message that women can. But the next question, though, is since this is what we're seeing in our society, what kind of message can you give to, say, even a single mother that could help to have a well-regulated son so that we don't have that same thing seem to be perpetuated over and over again? Because if not, the cycle isn't broken. So what could you say to the single mothers, right, who actually are raising sons, so that we could have boys who could take that place, so that we could have much more of that same unit that we think that might be necessary to get the best man later on?
So I'm going to interject just briefly, and they'll answer on the other side, right? Men, we're focusing on men, of course, boys, men, but some of the things that men experience are anger, silence, escapism, where they're just simply withdrawing, and I think the gentleman mentioned that, and I would like for you guys to really address it. Isolation and numbness. Which of these expressions do you see most often in men, and what would you simply say to those gentlemen to kind of help them in reference to Mr. Benjamin's question to regulate?
So it's anger, silence, escapism, isolation, and numbness.
I mean, my experience here, coming back to St. Thomas, I think escape, not being present. Because, I coach baseball, and, and I'm around a lot of youths, and doing the games, practice, is a lot of the women bringing them here, bringing them to the game, and also making up excuse why the father is not there, and the father is accepting that too. But if I go to the cockpit, if I go to to the horse race, they're there. If I go to the local bar, they're there. But we allow them. We don't hold them accountable. And for other men, we have to hold them accountable. We have to hold each other accountable. We can't allow them, give them that space to escape. We can't. And we got to hold each other accountable. And we don't do a good job in doing that. It's not. I'm at the ballpark. I'm a father, and I'm there, and I coaching your son, or your son play with my son or my daughter, and I see you all the time, but not even ask, hey, why you don't come to the game? Why you not in school? Why I'm never seeing you at any of the school meetings? Hold them accountable, and we do not a bad job of holding each other accountable, and knowing that they're doing that, and we kind of go ahead with that behavior and accept that behavior, and we have to stop. We have to hold each other accountable. And if you see your brother, your uncle, your son, if you have not doing the right thing, approach that. Talk to them about it. Hey, you messing up. You're not doing the right thing. Somebody else is raising your child, and you can't be upset. So we have to hold each other accountable.
To answer that question, as a social worker here in St. Thomas for, I'd say, 14 years, in dealing with parents, dealing with crises, sitting in parent-teacher meetings, I've seen all of the emotions. I've seen the anger, I've seen the silence, I've seen the escapism. Whenever they're challenged about something that they don't know how to handle. The anger comes when they're cussing about the child's behavior. The silence comes when the problem just seems unbelievable. The escapism comes when the problem just seems, or what they have to do to deal with the problem just seems overwhelming and unbearable. We've seen it, and we kind of, for too long. And numbness, yeah, the numbness, and that's kind of like the absentness, so they're just acting like they don't care, like it doesn't matter. And these are real serious issues because, the majority of these, in the majority of these situations, there's dysfunction. There's either behavioral issues, academic deficiencies, or abuse and neglect in the household. And with those three things, those are stressors that we talk about in counseling that kind of are negative indicators that that person, if they grow up and they don't get these things addressed, that is going to lead to a poor outcome, a poor quality of life. And we need fathers to understand that. Like I tell my kids all the time, you can be better than your parents. You don't have to settle. They brought you into this world. You can do better than what they did. You can be the first in your family to go to college. You can be the first in your family to start a business, to be successful. You don't have to repeat the cycles of dysfunction because life kicked your family in the behind and they just decide to give up and act like emotions don't exist, and a lack of goal setting as well. So we definitely need to, like Mr. Rivera said, hold fathers more accountable and let them understand the ripple effect of their actions, the ripple effect of their neglect. Because neglect over time becomes abuse. And abused people go out there and they abuse other people if they don't get treated. That's the reality.
So for me, first of all, to add to your list, I would add like irritability and agitation. And then under, you were talking about escapism, I would add like sub-bullets of like overworking and hypersexual behavior. And so what would I say to a man kind of experiencing any of those things, or a combination? I mean, for me, I think the first thing is to learn to identify what it is that you're feeling. And we spent a lot of time talking about, boys not being allowed to cry or express emotions or whatever, but I think the result of that is not having a full understanding of what they're feeling when they are feeling whatever it is, and needing to fully understand that. Like a lot of people sometimes don't even understand that like emotions exist on a continuum, right? So it's not just angry, happy, sad. Like if you're talking about like happy, it's like a continuum from like, a little bit cheery to happy to ecstatic. Same thing goes with anger. You can be like a little irritated, annoyed, angry, enraged. It's a whole continuum, and people have to learn how to identify, first of all, what they're feeling, and then from there, now what do I do with it? How do I appropriately express what I'm feeling in a way that is socially acceptable? And so really my answer to your question is kind of the same to the men and to the women who are parenting, single parents. Basically, don't just automatically shut the behavior out. Don't just, tell them to stop crying or tell them to stop doing whatever. Like, take a moment to help that child understand what it is that they're experiencing. Label it. Even if you have to go online, print out a feelings chart and sit down if they're like really young and don't have the vocabulary to figure out what it is that they are feeling. And then from there, teach them how to appropriately express whatever that emotion is. And then now to couple that, ideally, of course, get fathers involved, but if they're unwilling or whatever the case is, then also seek out positive male role models and mentors and stuff like that can also be involved, because there's a difference between telling a boy how to behave and them having the opportunity to see it being appropriately modeled by a grown man. So that kind of sums up my answer to you, is not only teach them to identify the emotions and then what appropriate expressions there are for that emotion, but then also try to find people who can support you in demonstrating it to them.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I forgot to answer the question about what would I tell a single mother, about that's raising young boys, without their father. Well, if you can't find a male role model that you believe would be the right fit, that is a positive example for your children, I would say the first things first is to find a value system, a moral system, a moral code, that could help lead your child down the right path. Because when you don't have the right values and morals in place, you're going to end up in interpersonal problems. In school, it's all about, she said this about me on social media. They said that about me on social media. They said this, and they feel that that is a legitimate reason for them to go out there and attack somebody because they said something about you. So if we set the morals in the home about understanding that just because somebody said something about you, that doesn't mean you have to go and fight somebody. It's not about tit for tat. Any people can say what they want. You understand? So, but some parents actually go out and encourage this kind of behavior. So there must be a moral system in place. There must be a value system in place to keep your children under control. That's what I would say.
So I have, I'm sorry, there's to the mic.
Pleasant Sabbath. I like, as I move around the island, I'm pretty active, and I would go at the various lookouts sometime. And one time I was there, and I saw a father that I know. He pulled up and parked next to me, and, he had his son. And they were sitting in the back of the truck on the tailgate. And he was counseling his young son, maybe around 13 years old, his son was. And as I sat there and I listened, my blood crawled. Because I wouldn't get into what he was telling him, but for any normal father, especially a Christian father, your blood would crawl to hear the things he is counseling his son to do. And, I think back during, they blame one of the presidents sometime back, a few elections back, for initiating gay and whatnot. And a gentleman said to me around that era, he said, you see this gay movement and why they passing these laws giving the right to be gay and all of this and gay pride. And he said this. He said, the families around the world is in big trouble, especially in developed countries. And any family is better than no family. That's the way they look at it. So they come up with this gayness and whatnot and so on. And the structure of the family is just deteriorating.
Again, not all men could be daddies, and not all men should be entitled to raising a boy, or not all men could teach a boy how to be a man. And there's, for women who's looking for a male figure to help them with a boy, there could be an uncle, there could be a neighbor, there could be a coach. You have to seek that out. But a lot of times you might want that father around, but that might not be a good thing. You might want that mother around, but that might not be a good thing. So we have to know who that person is before we put our children in that person's hands. Because that person might not be the right fit or the right person for your child. Yes, the traditional family have changed. And I've worked in foster care for many of years here, and especially in the States for many of years. And not all, because you was born into a family, that don't mean that family is the one that will be able to care for you, or will do the best job for you. And a lot of my foster kids will say, I can't wait to get home. I can't wait to go back to my family. And once they get to that age and they go back to the family, we're like, damn, and they come back. So Riviere, I'm glad I wasn't able to live there, because they realized their family had a lot of issues, and sometimes other people, the uncles, the aunt, other folks saved them from that mother and father or from that family life. So it's who is capable of caring for that child. I always look at it that way. Who is capable of caring for that child, and who will make that best parent for that child? No matter who that person is.
So anybody else has any comments, questions around that? Go ahead.
So first I would say to the question that he asked, I do not think a woman could raise a man. So I don't think a single mother can raise a man to be a man, because she doesn't know what it is to be a man. She cannot ever have that experience, because men and women live different lives. Very simple. So I also don't think it needs the celebration for being a single mother. You just have to do what you need to do, because that's the position that you put yourself in or found yourself in, and we have to live with that. That's one. I think second, saying that men don't hold men accountable is not true. Most men hold most men accountable. There's a very small percentage of men who, at this point, we just like it's not worth saving, because it doesn't matter what you say, you can't help. Because almost every guy, if a man does something wrong, men are going to say he did something wrong. Men hold men accountable the majority of the time. I think there's a small percentage of men who are irresponsible, who have a bunch of children out of wedlock, and you can't expect those men to come, because no matter what you say, they're not going to change and be better. And men know this. Back in the day, that was the reason why a father was at home, and when the bad boy came around, he would run him away, because he didn't want the bad boy messing with his daughter. Now, we have no father at home, so the bad boy is what is being chosen, which again seems to be the minority. Because most men who have children out of wedlock are not the best men. And it's a minority. Most men don't even have children, right? Most men don't have children. And most men who have children, most of those men, they're married. And to say that you can't find a role model when there are this many churches on the island doesn't make any sense either. If you happen to be a single mother and you can't find a good role model, let's go to a church. and find a leader there. There's plenty of churches. What I'm saying is that we hold men accountable. What I think needs to happen is we need to make sure that going forward, that the men that are coming up, they have to have role models. I think we can't continue to promote or celebrate single family homes. I think that needs to stop. We have more baby showers than we have weddings. And it seems to be a whole industry now. We need to stop that, all right? And I think once we start that, and we make sure that we protect the future of young men, I think we won't have any more issues.
I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Well, we do try in counseling, try to stay away from generalizations because each person's life and the circumstances and the characteristics that they're dealing with are much different. Also, how would you, sir, explain the many single mothers that have raised strong black men, not just nowadays, from, back in my grandfather, my uncle's times, most of these guys were raised by single mothers, and they went on to go ahead and live very successful lives for their families, and some of them even had children out of wedlock, went to church, repented, and rebuilt their relationship with all their estranged children. So this is why I'm saying we can't always generalize.
Well, the thing is, the reason why we generalize is because if you look at the minority, you miss the big picture of what the big problem is. That's like saying there's a lot of people who came from broken, destroyed homes, and they grew up to be something successful. That's the minority. Using the minority as the example for the majority doesn't make any sense. Again, if a woman raises a child, nothing is wrong with that, and he becomes successful, we're not discounting that. Mm-hmm. What we're saying is, what is the best solution for the majority of people? Because we can't focus on individualism doesn't fix the big problem. We have to focus on the major issues.
Well, what I would say is the best solution for the majority of people is everybody to become emotionally intelligent. That's what I would say. It starts with understanding your emotions and the impact of them, particularly in decision making when you deal with the ups and downs of life. I would say that would be the way to help the majority of these people, male, female, and children.
I agree.
And also, I think
Could I, before you go?
Okay.
I agree, because I like to kind of hit one point before. I agree that emotional intelligence is necessary. But we have to be realistic. Men are not supposed to be overly emotional. It's not something we should be. We have emotions.
Is that your opinion?
I mean, historically.
If it's your opinion, fine. I just don't agree. But
that's fine too. You don't have to.
That's what I'm saying.
And the reason is too, even women don't like emotional men. Men don't like emotional men, right? And the thing is, if we want to be honest with ourselves, the way for men to be emotionally intelligent is through discipline. Discipline is what we need. Because if you don't have disciplined boys, you have emotional men.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the thing is, we don't want to run away from making sure discipline, which is why the only way you can provide is if you have discipline.
Mm-hmm. I think also we need to stop allowing people to tell our story, and then when they tell our story, we paint a picture in our mind that this is how a black man is. You know that majority of folks who show up to schools are black men. You know, a majority of black men ain't the majority in prison. You know, black men.
I agree. Which is why I want to contradict the statement that we don't hold men accountable.
Married than not married. So we telling other people's story about ourselves. And when we continue to tell other people's story, we kind of spread about a negative outlook on us. Look at all these black men here. And I guarantee you, majority of them are married. Majority of them are raising children. So we have to stop preaching and having this misnomer about ourselves and about our community. Yes, all communities, more white people kill white people. Yes, more black people kill black people. More Chinese people kill Chinese people. That's how it is. You know, it's not all black people killing black people. All black men are committing crime. That's not, because we are allowing other people to tell our story. We got to start telling our story and look at it in our eye, in our point of view, instead of allowing other people to come and tell, hey, this is statistics. No, it's not. You know, so we have to change the narrative. I'm going to continue to say that. We have to change the narrative, how we look at each other.
I agree, and which is why I wanted to come up, because the narrative before, we don't hold men accountable, we are emotional. And again, this came from...
Well, that's not what we're saying, though. We're not saying we're not holding man accountable, but we need to do more. We're not saying that. No, we're not saying individuals are not doing that. There's a lot of folks who are holding, but we need to do more. We need to do more.
And again, I'm just going back to what was said. I'm not repeating nothing that wasn't said. I'm only here to refute what I heard that I know is not true. Now, if it was misspoken, that's fine. But what I'm never going to do is run away from what needs to be done. And it's not, we can't coddle young men. They need to be strong, they need to be disciplined, because how can you lead if you buckle under pressure? The women that are going to follow these men and choose their leader in the home, they're not going to choose someone weak. The reason why a woman will say, hey, you didn't do it right, is because she don't have faith in you. And how does she not have faith in you? You have lack of discipline. So how do we fix the issue if we don't address the problem?
For just 1 minute, because I feel like we have gone all over the place and a little bit derailed. Nobody is saying that young men need to be coddled. Nobody is saying that there's not a need for discipline. Emotions, at least I don't know about anybody else, but what I'm trying to convey is that emotions are not gender specific. It's not like these emotions are only for boys, these emotions are only for girls. They are a part of the larger human experience, period. Now, we all experience and feel the same things. Now, how it's okay to express those socially, yes, of course, there are social sanctions that basically dictate what is appropriate, typically in our westernized society, culture, than others. And the whole conversation about what's okay or not, it also varies depending on the culture that you're talking in. So just be mindful as well. That's another point for, it's not just as simple as men this, women this, because it varies depending on the culture that you're discussing. So nobody is saying men shouldn't be disciplined or don't raise boys in a particular way to have expectation and accountability. What I am saying is that don't negate and just automatically shut off that boys have feelings of a particular nature, and then help mold them to learn how to express those, how to realize what they're feeling, how to acknowledge what they are, and then from there, how they should appropriately express them based on the society in which they live. But emotions across the board, they exist in us because we are people.
I agree. What I would say is that the way men process emotions versus women process emotions can and should be different, because if a man gets overly emotional, we have school shootings. That's because men get very extreme with extreme anger, with extreme rage, which is why discipline is necessary. Which is why I'm saying that...
Excuse me. I think this is where the conversation was going, right? Where we're trying to express about managing our emotions so that we don't have these school shootings and all these things. There's an appropriate way in which we handle them. What we don't want individuals to go away from here is to understand that men should not have emotions, because they do.
Correct.
And what they're teaching is how they can manage them most appropriately and help them to regulate.
identifying and regulating.
I agree with all of that. What I'm saying is the way that it is handled is different.
So
Because
I
it
don't
has
think
to be.
anybody has said anything different than that. But what we are saying is that we're having a platform where individual or men are able to understand and identify why they were not able to connect to their emotions. That's what this platform is for. Okay?
Okay.
So, Mr. Ray?
You sit down, please. I have the right to do that because perhaps I need to spend some more time with him too. So that's my son-in-law. So there are a lot of things I agree with him on in business and some other things that we work with. But I have to say that for someone who grew up with a grandmother and my mother, single parent, I don't think I can agree with every single thing that, in the context that he mentioned. Now, I know that you have your father and mother, and you grew up under that, and I could respect that. I didn't have that privilege. And so there are a lot of men who are very seasoned, emotion or no emotion, by growing up with parents or grandparents. I grew up with my grandparents until age 12. My grandmother, not grandparents, grandmother. The process of taking in information, as you grow and develop, it's a choice that a person makes that makes a difference. I was also very fortunate or blessed to have some male figures that helped me along the way. But ultimately, it was my choice as I grew older. So I believe that emotionalism may be expressed differently from the male and female, but emotionalism exists. And I have cried in many cases where I had to, because I felt it was necessary. I wasn't afraid to cry, because I know sometimes you got to do it. So I love my son-in-law, and I believe in being tough, but we have to understand there has to be a balance. And maybe there needed to be a little bit cuddling once in a while with the sons and fathers. And maybe they need a little bit of hugging to let them know how much you love them and care for them. So this thing about toughness, yes, it's important that men have the male figure and going out there and making sure they do what they're supposed to. But I believe there's a need to be a balance of emotionalism, the toughness, the discipline, but also there's such a thing as counseling. Working along with the person, understanding where they're coming from. The children nowadays are not who we grew up with. It's not the same people. It's not the same. They're smart in different ways, and they'll tell you things that you... I mean, I have my granddaughter who she take a phone and she's finding things I never find. I could never locate them. How did you get into that? In other words, we have to look at the approach. Every time I look at where we are today, it's like a season. And if we don't adjust, it's like someone who's going sailing. Everything that we can say, wind, change. No, the wind will not change. We have to adjust our sail when the wind comes to us. So I agree, I love you dearly, and I agree with a lot of what you said. But I'm going to tell you from experience that as you grow, it's the choices that you make, and I'm going to tell you that grandmothers and mothers, there are a lot of grandmothers and mothers who have made a difference in successful men's lives. And I'm not saying I'm one, but I can tell you, I listened, I learned, and I did what I was supposed to. No further questions, Your Honor.
So this is just a reflective question. What's one lesson you wish that someone had taught you how to be a man, how to understand your emotions?
One lesson that you wish somebody taught you?
Well, let me, there's many lessons that I wish my parents had taught me. I would say that the main thing that I would say is that it's okay to feel. It's okay to feel. And when I say this, I mean it's okay to feel our negative emotions. I tell kids all the time, you know, that life has its ups and downs, and while we do so good with the positive emotions, the cheerful ones, the ones that make us feel good, is the ones that don't make us feel good, is the ones that are usually detrimental to our behavior. You know? So, growing up, we are taught that we're not taught how to deal with disappointment that well. We're not, especially when we don't achieve something. I remember not doing good on my SATs, and my father made me feel like I was stupid. But he didn't understand that at that moment, I didn't need criticism. I needed support. So I grew up with an insecurity that there was always this pressure, that if I didn't pass every single test, that it meant that I was stupid. No, it didn't mean that at all. It meant that I'm human, and humans make mistakes. You know, so I wish that that had been, you know, drilled to me more growing up, so I wouldn't have all this anxiety and pressure, you know, that ended up manifesting itself in other different areas. But that's one thing that I do wish.
Yeah, I think mine is similar, where learn how to give praise, you know, because it was never given to you. You know, understanding what it is to give somebody, your children, a family member, someone praise. And, you know, good job, I love you. Even the word I love you was, you know, didn't exist in my home. You know, and hey, you know, what parents say that was like, you know, it was like foreign. You know, so even being able to say that to my children, you know, I had to learn how to say that, you know, so being able to give praise and also receiving praise back, because it's difficult when somebody tell me I'm doing a good job. I don't know how to take it. I don't know how to like respond when somebody say, hey, good job, you're doing a good job. You know, I feel almost ashamed, you know, to get praise, you know, and because, you know, it was expected. Oh, okay, you come home a good grade, okay, and you know, you did good baseball. Oh, you should do that. You know, it wasn't nothing that, hey, good job, you know, proud of you. It was never that. So taking and accepting praise and giving praise is one thing that I wish that I used to hear more or hear more from my parents.
For me, I would say that I wish I had learned earlier in life that it's okay to not always have to like basically wear this mask and act like you have it all together. You know, kind of thinking back to childhood, you know, kids could be rough. So sometimes if you like, you know, let's say if you're dealing with something and you try to open up to friends about it, like, your boy's gonna immediately crack jokes, right? You know, because we tend to not, especially at a younger age, not take things necessarily seriously. So now, you know, maybe you tried once or twice, and because your friend group just kind of like glossed it over and made it a joke, you kind of learn to, okay, well, it's not really safe to do that. Let me not do that, right? So it wasn't until further on in life and you know, I guess your friend circle being a little bit more mature to kind of realize that, you know, that doing that and opening up when you are dealing with something, you know, can be a place that you could potentially find some support that you need.
Okay. So our last question of the evening is, if tears don't disappear but relocate, where do we want the next generation of boys to put their emotions?
What we want the next generation of boys to be able to do is to be able to identify their emotions, process them, and direct their behavior in the right way so that emotion doesn't make them have a negative outcome. It's all about identifying, processing, and then, what you do next. What you do next with the next decision. Because, crying is not only an emotional response, it's a biological response. A baby cries when you slap them, a baby cries when they're hungry, right? So it's a biological response. And as we get older, we understand that we need to cry because crying is the body's way of filtering your emotions. And just like an air filter or a water filter in your house, if that water filter, air filter gets clogged, what? Your car can't breathe, your water pump can't pump, it's harder to pump. It's harder to go through life if you bottle up your emotions. Because at one point, when you shake up a soda, and then you open it, at one point, your body can't take it anymore, and then you're going to erupt. So, and that's what happens, in these types of situations where these men go on school shootings and stuff like that. And it happens with women, too. Women do knee-jerk things when life gets too much for them sometimes, and we see women killing their children. So men and women do feel intense, severe emotions. So, like I said, crying is the body's way of filtering out your emotions. If you don't cry and filter out your emotions, your whole emotional system, your nervous system is going to get backed up. Those feelings might get suppressed, in your subconscious mind. And then some situation down the road might trigger those suppressed feelings, and because you didn't deal with them, you act on them. And it usually turns out in a negative outcome. So we want our boys to be able to identify, process, and then make a rational decision for themselves.
I think before that could happen, I think the boys, the children, are always the low-hanging fruit. We always try to go at them first because they're low-hanging fruit. But it starts with us as adults. I always say, go to the school, we teaching, we have adults teaching children how to self-regulate when they never learn how to do it themselves. We're teaching kids to respect adults, respect teachers when the teachers or the adults do not respect them. We have to be able to teach it. We have to be able to model it. And it starts with us. It starts with the teachers. It starts with the pastors. It starts with the congregation. It starts with the adults. You will have to start modeling these things to those boys. You have to also teach yourself how to be. You have to be, first you have to be open to relearn some things. You have to be open to your own emotions because you can't model it and you can't tell your son or your daughter, go out there and do it when you never model it to them. So it starts with us as a community. It starts with us as men to change how we view things, change how we look at each other, and change what a man role should be. Change how, you shouldn't be emotional, you shouldn't cry. We have to change that. We have to be vulnerable with each other. And in order for our boys to go out there and learn that, and learn something different, we have to show them something different. So it starts with us, modeling those things and being willing to change.
I agree that it's definitely important for us to model those behaviors. For the next generation, really what I hope is that there's a level of self-awareness that develops, that not only are they able to identify what they're feeling, but that they're also able to, even if they don't necessarily have the vocabulary or the words to identify what they're feeling just yet, that they can at least feel that there's a change happening in their body. When we have a lot of heightened emotions, usually there's something that's happening physiologically that corresponds at the same time. So, a lot of people, when they get anxious, you're feeling tightness in your chest, you're clenching your jaw, there's something going on. And so even if you can at least just realize, okay, there's a change happening in my body at this moment, that can then be the first sign to saying, okay, what am I dealing with? And then from there, figuring out how you can handle it. And even if you don't know how to handle it, in that moment, at least being able to pull yourself back away from the situation enough that you're not doing something that you're going to regret later on.
Oh, okay. Who was first? We're going to hold the women for just a minute. Go ahead.
I'm going to begin at a place that is more for your audience. Train up a child in the way they should go, that when they're old, it will not depart from them. I believe that because there are so many veins of issues running together, we're seeking to isolate issues and fix them as if the issue, the symptom, is the issue. The sickness cannot be cured by dealing with the symptoms. Now, words matter. I was late. And in listening, there are lots of things that I heard that, for me, appears to be antithetical to finding and helping persons of my gender. I heard many things from the three individuals which appear, and this is me, which appear to be a little bit confusing at times. We have to be able to understand the male experience. And those ladies standing there and all of those sitting here will never understand the male experience. Yes, women have raised males who have been successful or who can be deemed to be successful, yet these males, if you're able to speak to them, they will tell you their deficiencies. And if they are self-aware enough, they will be able to attribute it to that which they couldn't get from a woman. Now, for many of us, we need help. Because I can tell you, I was raised by women, and they would tell you that behaving like them is not for me. They are emotional. They go where they go. They say what they say. They behave and react how it is. But they don't see a male in how they behave. And they sought to steer me away from being like them. Now, emotions are a human issue. We all have them. Yes, but we know, for many of us in the black experience, boys were told not to cry. Crying speaks to being female. Subconsciously, you get that impression and it stays with you. So in order to navigate, when you come to a place of awareness, you're now older, where wisdom comes in, and you begin to see a different picture, and you have to begin to calculate, okay, I was taught this, but I need to discard that concept. But that requires now acceptance, and I need to now begin to learn a new course, which I may run into and hit my head a couple of times before I could grasp that new concept. This is life, and life is real, active, and fluid. There are no rigid pieces that we can provide any particular person here that the manual says if we do this, this, and this, it will turn out this way. It's not possible. So we really need to be able to speak to the necessary particulars that individuals have. And I'm going to tell you that you can generalize, because there's so many studies that do tell you when you put little girls in a group, the activities that they use to socialize is much vastly different than what boys do when they are placed in a group. Boys immediately structure themselves into hierarchy. Who's captain? Who's head? Who's the big one? The best? Oh, okay, we can follow him. Girls play in community, friendship, feeling, so forth. That's how it works. So we can generalize because there are things that are specific to the genders. But what I would like to say is we have to be mindful of how we say what we're saying, because just saying emotions, it's real, but you must be able to speak to the male experience as to what that emotion look like, because when you just say blanket emotion, I look at humanity. Emotions from man leads to violence if it's not learned to be managed. Because my feelings are mine, and how I express them is built on all the stairs that has been created in my experience. So telling males they need to be more emotionally intelligent, it can be subjective, but it's a concept that we need to break down so that it becomes logical. You can maybe speak to women like that, and they work around it. But for men, you know, the lady just threw a question to each of you, and I saw the wheels and like, yeah, they're stomping their heads too. Even though you're talking about emotional intelligence, your personal experience rises to the surface when the issue calls you to be reflective. The gentleman spoke about not knowing how to experience hearing you did a good job. And that goes right back to train up a child in the way they should go. The experience that they had been young. Gentleman in the middle spoke about his concept of what his father thought. It may not be real, that his father thought he was stupid, but that was your concept. And you lived with it as if it's true. And it influenced and impacted you in a way in which you thought you need to alter your behavior in order to right yourself with that thought that you thought your father thought. So we have to be mindful when we're speaking to males and females.
If we made it confusing, that wasn't our intention. But I think, it's still a balance, because as early childhood development, you have to take stuff from your mom, because majority of the time for men, for a boy or a girl, they spend majority of the time with that mom for maybe first 5, 6 years, 7 years of their life. So they're going to get her stuff. And then if there's a male model in the house, then that's where the other part comes in. So it still is a balance. No matter how we shape it, we still need that balance. And that's what we trying to express. It's still is a balance. Emotional imbalance. Emotional intelligence is a balance. Emotional regulation is a balance. You can't be all, one way and not the other. It's a balance. This is what we was born into,
I want to thank the gentleman for his point. It's very valid, but I understand how things could be a little confusing. But in therapy, we talk a lot about a lot of theories. And one of the theories that helps to explain human behavior and diagnose human problems is complex systems theory. Human beings are at the top of the food chain. We're above the animals because we're complex. We have complex emotions. We're the most complex species on the planet. So if something is wrong with a human being, there could be anything that could be the problem. It's just like a car not starting. It could be the battery, it could be the starter, it could be the wires or a fuse or something like that. There could be any reason why a human being is not performing to their potential or having these kind of issues. And one of the things that help us understand that is generalizations. But in therapy, we cannot make generalizations when we're dealing with our individual client. We have to deal with that client where they are and who they are. So we do take our clients on a case-by-case basis and don't generalize. We know what the stereotypes are, but we as well have to guard ourselves against generalizing, because once we do that, then we kind of circumvent the whole reason why we're there in the first place, because then they come across as like we're judging them. So I hope that helps to break down some of the confusion. And I understand it could be confusing, but human beings are complex, and social work, therapy, these type of things are very complex, and this is why we have to be so studied and so well versed in it, so we could come out here and explain these different nuances to people. There could be any reason why a family has dysfunction. There could be any reason why some single mothers still raise independent and well-to-do black children, and one of the reasons why is because particularly when it comes to black women are the most educated minority in America. More black women have college degrees than any other minority. So despite their downfalls, they're still able to compete in this society and help lead their children down the right path. Of course, there are some that do fall through the cracks. We even have single fathers that are raising children, and some of those children turn out to have poor outcomes. But that's what we're dealing with. Complex systems theory is very nuanced. Nothing is the same, so we can't generalize. We understand the generalizations, but we can't apply them individually. So I hope that helps to explain and dissuade some of the confusion.
For me, what I would say is that I think in most of the conversation today, what I've been trying to convey is that because of the way that society is structured, that there are certain things when it comes to the handling of emotions, the acknowledgement of emotions, the expressing of emotions, that men or boys that grow into men tend not to basically find acceptable, or that skills in particular, emotion areas that tend not to be nurtured because of what society expects to be the case in the gender norms and gender roles. And so the point of talking about this is so that men can gain awareness of that and the areas in which they potentially need to develop a little bit more, because if those deficiencies aren't addressed, then they will affect you in other domains of your life and at various stages in your life later on. And then not only is it going to be affecting you, that then there's the ripple effect of it being those same skill sets and lack of skill sets in other areas being passed on to the next generation. And so the point is just for men to be given the permission to acknowledge and explore how they feel in various domains of life, and then learn how to express them in a way that is situationally appropriate.
Kajai?
He looked like he stepped out.
Oh, because that was the only young male that was in our audience, so I would have loved to hear what he was saying.
Good afternoon. I was going to touch on the topic of the single parent. As a black society, the white man stereotypes us as the poor people. We always have broken families, broken homes, no money. We are the ones that are not supposed to rise the social ladder. And it takes a deliberate effort for a single parent to say, I don't want my child to end up the way I am. So therefore, I have to use every means that I know is within the parameters of the law to make sure that my child does not grow up to turn out the same way I was. That my child becomes successful and can raise a proper family on his own. And as a faith-based congregation, a single parent should not be just looking for a male figure. We have male figures all around. So single parents, they should have some way to reach a male figure in any way possible. So that was my comment.
Yes, from the mouth of babes. So I wanted to thank everybody that came out tonight. I wanted to thank the women because you guys sat in a supportive role. And I really appreciated that. Because this was a platform for the men to identify and speak about their experience, and it was not a comparable. So I really appreciate that. And, you know, this is the touch of the tip of the iceberg. So this is another set of conversations that we probably need to build on. We keep doing that, Jessica. So I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Jarvis.
Okay, so as we wrap up, guys, Mr. Bailey, you had a question you wanted to ask, or you just wanted to make a quick comment?
Man, just blew me away. I thank you for this. I actually got some therapy today from one of my alumni at University of Delaware, Curtis, about wearing the mask. But the quick question I wanted to ask you guys for advice. The topic is single moms, and it's best to raise a kid. I'm not going to get into that. But I will say, coming back from Florida, every weekend, me and my cousin, we take out some young men to the movies, and I must say, I've never experienced so many single moms. It's a lot of single women raising boys. And while I know that, yes, there are exceptions to the rules that LeBron James, a single mom, but data has shown that boys who have a steady father in the house actually rise to be leaders in the next generation. So I want to ask you guys, because living here by default, a lot of us men now have to be fathers by default, because young men are looking at us by default. Hey, well, you're the guy. What advice would you guys have for us who say, you know, professional guy moving through life, but now I got to be someone's role model? What would you say to that to take that role on by default? And shameless plug, I'm running for Senate. Number 5 on the ballot. I had to just plug it. Peter Bailey, by the way.
So before you answer, I'm going to use this as our last segment before we close. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's they're saying it take a village to raise a child. And I think we all, you know, can, you know, model that. But then also, you know, the village have to be good. Because if you have a dysfunctional village, well, you're going to be raising dysfunctional children. You know, so we have to deal with our village, and we have to step up and be responsible as men. You know, I'm not saying that's not my issue. Everything that goes around us is our issue, because a child you might neglect today, or I'm not going to touch that, he's bad, might come back and haunt you later on. You know, so we have, as that village, we have to start fixing our village, you know, and start making it functional and not being dysfunction. Because if we continue to be dysfunction, we're going to be raising dysfunctional children. So the village, and we have to continue to make steps. We have to continue to encourage other men to do the same. You encourage this congregation to do the same. You know, at one time, you couldn't walk down the street. You do something down the street, and a father or a mom or somebody see you, they're going to correct you without any consequence. And if you go back and you go home, hey, so-and-so put hands on me. You're like, oh, and your parents will put hands on you. So we got to go back to not the corporate punishment part, but how we able to hey, you see a child doing something, be able to correct that child. And talk to that child in a way that that child doesn't feel, you know, that you're going to be aggressive or being scared. Because I had that. You know, my uncle's here, and his house was my safe haven. You know, I could go in Savannah anytime to his house, and that was my safe haven growing up. He was that person to me. You know, I could hear that from him. I could hear those positive stuff from him. I could get that hug from him. You know, so I had that. You know, so we have to continue those things. I have to continue to do the same thing that he did for me. So we have to continue to do those things.
You know, I mean, what you spoke about is very true, but I think, unfortunately, we have lost kind of that sense of collectivism, you know, and community when it comes to that. But, I mean, so I think that what we can do in the meanwhile is just try our best as a community to create as many spaces as possible where boys can see men who are grounded, who are doing good things, who are responsible and living a particular kind of life, so they can get a chance to be exposed to those men. You know, you can't become what you don't see, right? What you don't see as a possibility for you. And so I think whether it's, you know, church congregations, the Greek letter organizations, the school system, everybody needs to really, you know, come together and create like mentorship groups and different things where these young boys can have a chance to be exposed and see beyond Savannah, see beyond Bavoni, see beyond, you know, around the field, and see that there is something else for them, and believe that it's a possibility. You know, and I think on the individual level, beyond becoming involved in those groups, just being mindful as to how you carry yourself and what you do and how you present. Kids are very observant. And people pay attention. You never know who is watching and whose life you can affect just by living your own life in a positive manner.
Amen.
And I would say to any man that is considering taking on a woman with children and being, a father figure to that child, to first, number one, make sure you have integrity. Make sure that you have that woman and that child's best interests at heart. There can't be any subversive agendas, because then that child and that woman, especially the child, is going to be left vulnerable. So make sure you have integrity. You understand? Make sure you do what you say and you say what you mean. Because if you don't, children are very smart. They're going to be able to peep that. They're going to be able to peep that right away. You know what I mean? So you have to have integrity, and you have to have the needs of that child, you know, in your utmost regard, to the point where even if you and the mother don't work out, you and that child still have a positive relationship. You know, you could be the model, like what Mr. Rivera was talking about earlier, about modeling the acceptable behavior that you want the child to be able to pick up. You want to be able to influence a child positively, even if you and the mother break up. You know, so then it's all about your integrity, your warmth, your genuineness, your compassion, that even although me and your mother have parted ways, I'm still interested in your life and what you become, and willing to help you along the way. I still want to be that safe place. You know, I still want to be that model of a man, to show you that this is how, you know, you can be a successful member of society despite your situation. So I think it all starts with integrity and your actions.
All right. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, big boys don't cry. So where do the tears go? What we've learned this afternoon is that the tears go into maybe some bad behaviors, right? Mr. Rivera just pointed out dysfunctional communities
breed dysfunctional
dysfunctional children, which ultimately breeds what? Dysfunctional
communities.
men? Men, yeah. So I guess the bigger takeaway is if there are things that you've seen in your life, maybe there are things that you want to, in reference to what they've said, acknowledge and maybe process through what those things may look like. We want to thank our gentlemen for being here today. Once again, that's Mr. Roland Revere, Mr. Lloyd Maynard, and Mr. Curtis Callender. We thank you guys so very much for your wealth of knowledge and providing us with this opportunity to ask questions and be vulnerable.
Yes. And I want to also say Happy Father's Day to all.
No, Jessica, they're not for you. I want to say thank you to our moderators. I'm telling you, Shiloh, this wasn't firecracker. This was the big cannon guns you all brought out. I want to thank you so very much for having facilitated and made this happen. Now, this evening was a very unusual experience for me. I am not accustomed to sitting in the back of the class, and worse, shutting up. So I had to sit in the back of the class this evening, and I had to shut up. But I learned a lot, and I'm telling you, I am so excited that I was created a woman. I never realized before how hard it was to be a man. And I really hope that those of us who sat in the back of the class will provide the support that our gentlemen need through the prayers and our understanding. And yes, take out the towel and the kerchief when you go home, because these big boys may just start crying. Gentlemen, it's been such a pleasure having you here, and I just want to thank you for your expertise. I want to thank you for being available. I want to especially tell you how grateful I am that there are men who can talk to our men. We live in a society where it's hard to be men, but it's also optional. Yeah, or men don't have to be men anymore. They can choose not to be. And so when 3 cannons show up and show us how it's done, and they stand in the gap every day in a space that is bare of men, when women have to be putting on a suit and a rough voice to give the boys something, it is heartening that we have real solid men who know what they're talking about and who have decided to stay in the trenches to make a difference. And so, Mr. Callender, Mr. Maynard, Mr. Rivera, did I get it right? I did. I was in the back of the class, but I learned. Thank you so very much. And just to know that, yeah, I have to help out the lady. Just to know that there are heirs here, and there are hearts here ready to be transformed by you. And shameless plug, I'm going to have them on Chit Chat with Patty Pat very soon. Thank you so very much, and do come again.
I will allow the gentlemen to kindly take their seats. You know, I was sitting there and I said, when I go home, I have to speak to my wife, because a lot of the things that they were saying, like they were speaking to my story, you know, because we've been married. I keep telling her that she's taken all my life. At my young age, this year I think will be our 23rd wedding anniversary. So that says how young I was when we got married. And she's always been saying, you know, I need you to be there emotionally. But I was raised, or I came from the school where men provided all of the money and a nice home and vehicle. And so tonight, thanks so much, gentlemen. And it's not a shameless plug. I met with the gentlemen and I told them, I think they're going to have to be an integral part of the Better Men movement, St. Thomas chapter moving forward. As I stated, I have a lot of crazy ideas, Mr. Benjamin, but I thank God for people who can take them and run with them. And so the next event for us gentlemen, and we're going to ensure that it is not just us but everybody, we're going to ensure that we meet in a space where it is men alone, and we're going to do a black tie event before the year is over. And so our gentleman who is running for Senate, we're going to ensure that you get into the Senate, but you are going to have to ensure that you come on board. It's not a quid pro quo, it's just you're going to have to, that's our next event, a space where we're going to have our gentlemen, and we're just going to speak to men. We need to, as a faith-based community, change the narrative. I told them I'm a pastor. I don't have expertise in the science. I do marital counseling, and that's as far as I dabble. I don't do any more. And so we need the sciences coupled and aligned with the scripture so that we can change the society for the better. 2 more items and then we go home. 1, Sister Maisie produced a poem and she's given it to my son to recite, so we'll ask Kajai to come. And at the end, we will have an item of special music and then we pray. Thank you very much. 2 items and then we close.
Good evening to all. The poem was, as stated, written by Sister Maisie, and the title is very simple: Father's Day. Fathers are special people when they are loving and kind, when they teach their children how to have the finest kind of mind. If I remember my father, yours you'll remember too. If he takes you to church on a Sabbath and sits with you in the pew, if he helps you understand God and his son, the Jesus boy, if he sings and explains his sermon and makes your time together a joy, your father is a special person. And when he is old and gray, it will be your turn to take care and make his day. So celebrate Father's Day, whatever age you and your father are, because it is then a day of happiness to all, to make moral fathers a star.
Thank you very much. Can we have our item of special music? We're not having our item of special music? All right, stand with me as we pray. I am owed an item of special music in the presence of all these individuals. Since it is not Carnival Monday, we won't be calling any names. Otherwise, we will be liable. So we are owed an item of special music. Our heads are bowed. Eternal Father, we are thankful, dear God, that you would have blessed us to sit in the audience this afternoon and listen to counsel. Simple, but pointed. The discussion of God is one that needs to be had. How we wish we would be able to have these gentlemen not just once or twice, but on a regular basis to speak to the issues of men. We've not only been poisoned by sin, but the effects, the residual effects, that of constantly having men being broken, not being able to understand our emotions, not being able to deal with them in a proper way, not being able to speak about them, constantly having to repress them. And somehow the devil uses that for his advantage, because when he sees it fit, he allows them to be triggered. And the end is always destruction and death and joy being stolen, because that is his intent from the beginning. As we leave from this place, we pray, oh God, that the men who would have been in this audience, we would leave with not just a spirit of feeling buoyed, but we would take some time for deep introspection. And the truth is, some of us need help. And you've provided through the contact of Sister Jarvis these men. Let us not be ashamed. Let us speak with them so that they can help. Thank you for all of the ladies, all of the wives, the sisters, the friends who are here. Allow them to be a source of moral support to help us navigate the challenges we face daily. But most of all, we pray, dear Lord, that your Holy Spirit would speak to the issues. And as, oh God, your Spirit brings to our mind the things that need to be dealt with, while we pray, allow us to seek the help that is needed to make us better men of Shiloh. Thank you for this afternoon. Thank you for these young men. We pray, oh God, that you will bless them professionally. Like Jabez, we pray, oh God, that you will enlarge their territory. And, oh God, more than anything else, we look forward to the day when they too would be members here at Shiloh, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. May God bless you. May God bless you. Have a pleasant week, everyone. Have a pleasant week. May God bless you.